Hey, tonight we're venturing into one of the strangest mysteries in human history. Not missing people, but missing places. Whole cities gone. Vanished without warning, without explanation, and sometimes without even a trace. We're talking about civilizations that thrived for centuries, then crumbled into silence. Ancient roads swallowed by jungle, stone walls buried by sand, and entire populations that seemed to step off the map permanently. If you're into this kind of late-night journey through the strange and unsettling, drop a like or hit subscribe. It really helps keep this going. And hey, I always love knowing where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's build this little global campfire together. So go ahead, dim the lights, get cozy, and let's drift back through time together. Because tonight, we're uncovering how entire cities disappeared and why no one can still explain it. Some stories get louder the longer they're left unfinished. That's how it is with the lost city of Z. Not just a place, but an echo that bounces off vine-choked ruins, half-decayed maps, and the sharp silence of the Amazon rainforest. And at the heart of that echo is a man in khaki, staring into the green unknown like it owed him an answer. His name was Percy Fawcett. Explorer, soldier, adventurer, and possibly the last person to ever walk willingly into a myth and never walk back out. Percy Fawcett wasn't your average deluded treasure hunter. He was a decorated British officer and a respected cartographer, known for mapping vast stretches of South America with alarming precision and an even more alarming ability to survive things that killed other men. Swamps, snakes, hostile tribes, tropical disease. Fawcett handled them all like they were minor inconveniences on the way to something bigger. That something was Z, a city he believed lay deep in the Brazilian jungle, hidden from modern eyes and remembered only in whispers and fragments. He thought it predated European civilization, a shining beacon of ancient knowledge and culture. He had his reasons: rumors from indigenous communities, pieces of pottery, bits of ruined stonework, and an old 18th century document written by a Portuguese explorer who claimed to have seen great cities and archways that shone like silver somewhere beyond the river's bend. By 1925, Fawcett was ready. He announced to the world through newspapers and lectures that he was going to find Z. Not maybe, not investigate. He would find it. And he would prove that the Amazon was not an uncivilized wilderness, but the home of lost greatness. Accompanying him were his son Jack, Jack's best friend Raleigh Rimmel, and enough optimism to choke a jaguar. They were last seen in May of that year, waving goodbye from the outskirts of civilization as they headed into the forest. After that, nothing. Not a scream, not a flare. Just trees, rain, and time closing around them like a fist. What followed was less a rescue operation and more a series of increasingly unhinged attempts to chase a ghost through a rainforest that eats people for breakfast. Hundreds tried to retrace Fawcett's path. Some died. Others gave up halfway. A few turned around and said, maybe that man was a little nuts. But here's the thing, Fawcett wasn't just chasing gold or glory. He believed Z could rewrite history. At a time when the prevailing wisdom said indigenous Amazonian tribes were too primitive for complex cities, Fawcett was saying the exact opposite, that they had culture, architecture, knowledge, a whole timeline no one had cared enough to record. It wasn't just about bricks and temples, it was about respect. That idea, radical back then, has aged well. In the last few decades, archaeologists have uncovered massive pre-Columbian settlements in the Amazon, some with road networks, irrigation systems, even hints of urban planning. They're calling it the Amazonian Geoglyph Network, or Garden Cities. And guess what? Some of them sit right in the region Fawcett was heading toward. So maybe he was right. Maybe Z existed in some form, hidden under layers of jungle and centuries of erasure. And maybe it was never one city, but a whole civilization spread out like a vine-covered quilt, too subtle to be seen from above, and too massive to be seen up close. But then again, maybe he got lost. Maybe he starved. or drowned, or was killed by a tribe that didn't appreciate unexpected visitors. Some theories suggest he assimilated, that he found a village and simply chose to stay, growing old and wise under a new name, teaching his son how to fish and forgetting, slowly, what London smelled like. Other theories get weirder, that he found an alien relic and ascended, that he was swallowed by the earth, that he found Z, but it was cursed, and no one can ever leave once they've seen it. In the end, all we have is a mystery. A man walks into the green and never comes back. He leaves behind a trail of questions, a stack of books, a handful of weathered photos, and one impossible idea, that there is still magic in the world. Not dragons and spells, but real mystery. Places not yet charted. Stories not yet settled. Maps with blank spaces that don't say, "Here be monsters," just to be continued. The lost city of Z may or may not exist, but Percy Fawcett did. And whether he was a visionary, a fool, or something in between, he understood one thing better than most, that some doors you don't knock on. You walk through them, and you let the jungle decide if you're worth remembering. The desert is a quiet liar. It buries secrets in sand and lets them whisper to travelers half mad from heat and hunger. Somewhere beneath those dunes, or maybe only in the mind, lies Ubar, the so-called Atlantis of the sands, a city once overflowing with wealth, power, and incense, or so the stories go. It was called Eerie of the Pillars in ancient texts, a name that sounds like it belongs in a fantasy novel scribbled on papyrus. Then one day, the earth yawned, and it vanished. Ubar is one of those places that lives more comfortably in myth than in maps. The earliest references to it come from the Quran, where Iram is described as a city of lofty pillars built by the tribe of Ad and destroyed by divine wrath when its people grew arrogant and unjust. Depending on your translation, the city wasn't just forgotten, it was erased. Sandstorms, earthquakes, fire from the sky. Take your pick. Whatever happened, it was dramatic. And very final. For centuries, no one knew if Ubar had ever existed outside of poetry and sermons. The Arabian Peninsula is vast, and the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, is the kind of landscape that eats explorers and spits out sun-bleached bones. It's the largest sand desert in the world, with enough room to lose a dozen cities, their populations, and their camels. Then, in the 1990s, something strange happened. A team of archaeologists and NASA scientists, yes, really, analyzed satellite imagery and discovered what looked like ancient trade routes converging at a single point, a long-buried crossroads deep in the desert. That point turned out to be the ruins of a settlement near a place called Shisr in Oman. Excitement exploded. Had they found Ubar? The headlines screamed yes. Archaeologists were more cautious. What they found wasn't exactly a city, but it was definitely old, and definitely important. The settlement sat atop a large limestone cavern, a cavern that, at some point, collapsed in on itself, pulling part of the site down with it. Which, let's be honest, is exactly the kind of thing a legend would do in the third act. The researchers found evidence of ancient water wells, a fort-like structure, and signs of trade. Frankincense, that sweet-smelling resin used in rituals, medicine, and enough biblical references to fill a hymnal, was the city's main export. Caravans would stop at Shiz to refill their water, rest their camels, and exchange goods before vanishing back into the dunes. It wasn't a capital, necessarily. More like a vital checkpoint in a much larger, sand-covered circuit. But is that Ubar? It depends on how poetic you're willing to get. Some archaeologists argue that Ubar wasn't a single city but a whole region or a trade network. Others say the ruins at Shisr might be what's left of the legendary place if you squint through the dust of time. And some, predictably, say it's all a cover-up and that the real Ubar is still out there, glittering beneath the dunes like a buried spaceship. Because here's the thing about lost cities, they're rarely found cleanly. We want grandeur, towering temples, pillars of ivory, but time is a sandblaster. Even the grandest cities erode into suggestion. What remains is often little more than a collapsed wall and the memory of direction. Still, the story of Ubar endures for a reason. It's the idea that hubris has a gravitational pull, that even the mightiest empires can be humbled by the earth itself. That if you build too tall, boast too loud, or sell too much incense without humility, the desert might just eat you. The satellite photos still linger, those ancient road scars winding through the void. They hint at something big, something forgotten, something people needed enough to walk through hell to find. Whether that something was a city called Ubar or 100 outposts now folded into dust doesn't matter much in the end. Because the point of Ubar was never just the city. It was the fall, the lesson, the moment when the earth says enough and turns your skyscrapers into fossils. Maybe it was divine punishment. Maybe it was a sinkhole. Or maybe it's still out there somewhere just beyond the next dune, where the wind sounds suspiciously like a warning. Before the skyscrapers, before the colonial cities, and long before anyone thought to name a football team after the Rams, there was Cahokia, a pre-Columbian metropolis sitting near what's now East St. Louis. Cahokia was once the largest urban center north of Mexico. At its peak around the year 1100, it had a population that rivaled or exceeded London at the same time. Thousands of people, dozens of neighborhoods, public plazas, massive pyramidal mounds made of earth, the largest of which, Monk's Mound, still towers over the surrounding landscape, now with an excellent view of the highway. And then, sometime around 1350, they all left. No one knows why. Cahokia didn't fade over centuries, it more or less shut down. No signs of war, no mass graves from a plague, no records carved into stone tablets saying BRB. Just a few haunting clues, abandoned structures, overgrown mounds, and a sharp drop in population, so steep it's more like an evacuation than a decline. To understand how strange this is, you have to picture what Cahokia was. This wasn't just a random cluster of huts. It was an engineered city with planned streets, massive ceremonial platforms, and evidence of complex social and political organization. It had suburbs, sports fields, a giant wooden calendar circle nicknamed Woodhenge. These people built skyscrapers out of mud and organized labor forces, big enough to rival union crews today, all without metal tools or wheels. And yet they vanished like smoke. Theories, as you can imagine, are abundant. One of the more grounded ideas is environmental exhaustion. You don't build a city of 20 people without needing resources, and Cahokia's residents were definitely hungry. Archaeological evidence shows widespread deforestation, overfarming, and the erosion of fertile soil. Basically, the city may have eaten itself out of house and home, a cautionary tale that sounds weirdly modern. Then there's climate. Around the same time Cahokia began its downward spiral, the region entered what's known as the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that made agriculture trickier and may have caused widespread drought. If you rely on corn, and your corn doesn't grow, well, time to move. Still, those are logistical answers to what feels like a spiritual question, because Cahokia wasn't just a city, it was sacred. The mounds weren't just dirt heaps, they were layered with ritual, burials, cosmic alignments. People lived in the shadow of Monk's Mound the way Parisians lived near Notre Dame. They didn't just pack up and leave lightly. So maybe there were other forces. Internal unrest, for instance. As power structures shifted, maybe people lost faith in their leaders or their gods. Or maybe new spiritual revelations made it clear it was time to leave. In many indigenous cultures, migration is a cycle, not an end. Maybe Cahokia's fall wasn't a failure, but a planned movement towards something new. And then, of course, there's the unsettling silence. The fact that no direct oral histories seem to survive from Cahokia's builders. The way their legacy was almost completely ignored until archaeologists started digging in the 20th century and said, wait, there was a whole city here? That silence makes it easy for the weird theories to sneak in. That aliens built the mounds, that the city was cursed, that something unnatural drove them away. You can dismiss those, but part of you doesn't want to, because Cahokia feels ancient in a way that resists explanation. Its mounds loom like riddles half buried in grass, and no one has solved them. Today, Monk's Mound still stands, the largest prehistoric earthen construction in the Americas. You can climb it. At the top, you see the St. Louis skyline, and maybe, just maybe, feel a whisper of what this place once was. Not a ruin, not a ghost town, but a pulse, a center, a sacred city built on dirt and dreams, then left behind for reasons no one wrote down. Cahokia disappeared without burning, without screaming, without even a goodbye. And maybe that's what makes it so haunting. Cities usually fall with drama. Cahokia just slipped away, quietly, respectfully, like it knew it wasn't for us to understand. Akrotiri was the kind of city that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about the Bronze Age. Paved streets, multi-story houses, indoor plumbing, elegant frescoes of dolphins and lilies and saffron gatherers. It was clean, beautiful, and sophisticated, a Mediterranean dream powered by artistry, trade, and surprisingly modern urban planning. And then one day, it disappeared under hundreds of feet of volcanic ash, not slowly, not politically, just gone. This was no minor eruption. This was the kind of eruption that changes geography. Around 1600 BCE, the volcano at the heart of the island of Thera, now better known as Santorini, erupted with a force we can barely comprehend. It's believed to have been one of the most powerful volcanic events in human history, on par with Krakatoa or Tambora. The top of the island blew off. Ash rained across the Aegean. The sea pulled back, and then returned as a monstrous wave. Tsunamis slammed into Crete, and likely reached the shores of Turkey and the Levant. An Akrotiri perched right on the southern tip of the island was buried alive. But here's the strange part: we've never found any bodies. Archaeologists have uncovered pristine rooms, walls decorated with vivid scenes, pottery sitting right where someone left it. Yet there are no skeletons frozen mid-run, no mass graves, no signs of people being caught by surprise. It's as if everyone packed up and left just in time. This detail sets Akrotiri apart from Pompeii, its more famous Roman cousin. Where Pompeii's destruction was sudden and deadly, Akrotiri's seems more organized. Like they saw the warning signs: earthquakes, rumbling, smoke, and decided to leave before things got biblical. And while the ash preserved their homes and furniture, it preserved no hint of where they went. They vanished, orderly and entire, into history's blind spot. The city they left behind is stunning. Multi-story buildings with balconies, drainage systems that still make engineers nod in approval. Bright frescoes showing monkeys, birds, fish, and women with elaborate curls and jewelry. These weren't crude islanders. These were cosmopolitan people connected by trade routes to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. They lived with color, with ritual, with a strong sense of design and balance. And then the volcano cracked that balance open like an egg. Akrotiri's destruction had ripple effects far beyond its shores. The Minoan civilization, centered on nearby Crete, began to decline not long after. Whether it was because of tsunamis wiping out ports, or shifts in trade caused by the fallout, or just the psychological impact of watching your neighbors get erased by fire and ash, something broke. The powerful thalassocracy, sea empire that had dominated the region for centuries, faded, leaving room for new players like the Mycenaeans to rise. And now we get to the spicy part: Atlantis. For centuries, people have speculated that Akrotiri was the inspiration for Plato's legendary tale of a sunken civilization, a place of beauty and knowledge punished by the gods and swallowed by the sea. Sure, Plato set Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean and dated its fall thousands of years before Akrotiri, but the details? Advanced society, sudden destruction, lost beneath the waves. It all lines up a little too well. It's tempting to believe, to think that maybe, just maybe, the story of Atlantis wasn't entirely made up. That it was a garbled memory of Akrotiri's final day, passed down across generations and cultures, until it became a myth so big it outgrew its origins. Maybe. But even if Akrotiri isn't Atlantis, it doesn't need to be. Its story is rich enough on its own, a snapshot of what life looked like when people lived well, thought deeply, and built beautifully. And then watched it all disappear beneath something older and angrier than any empire, the Earth itself. Today, the ruins of Akrotiri are open to visitors. You can walk past perfectly preserved walls, look at staircases that still hold their shape, and see pottery that waited millennia to be uncovered. It feels like a place paused mid-sentence, like someone's about to walk back in with a basket of olives and a story to tell. But no one ever comes. Because Akrotiri didn't fall to invaders or plagues. It fell to the sky, to magma and ash, and the violent memory of a planet that occasionally reminds us who's in charge. And the people who lived there, well, they disappeared without a trace, leaving behind their paintings, their plumbing, and a mystery wrapped in volcanic silence. The Roanoke colony was supposed to be a new beginning, the English crown's first serious attempt at establishing a foothold in the New World. It had all the ingredients for colonial legend: brave settlers, hostile landscapes, supply ships braving the Atlantic, and just enough tension to keep things interesting. But what makes Roanoke unforgettable isn't what happened while the colony was alive, it's what happened when it wasn't. Or rather, what didn't happen. In 1587, about 115 colonists arrived on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what's now North Carolina. Led by John White, a seasoned explorer and artist, they were part of an ambitious plan to plant an English presence in the Americas and hopefully not starve or get immediately wiped out. Among the settlers was White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, who gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. It was a promising start. But almost immediately, the colony struggled. Supplies ran low. Relations with local indigenous groups were strained at best, fatal at worst. So just months after landing, White sailed back to England for reinforcements. He promised to return quickly, bring food, tools, reinforcements. You know, dad things, colonial governor things. He did not return quickly. What was supposed to be a few months turned into 3 years, thanks to the small inconvenience of the Anglo-Spanish War. England needed every available ship to fend off the Spanish Armada, and John White's resupply mission was repeatedly delayed. When he finally returned to Roanoke in August 1590, it wasn't to cheers or parades. It was to nothing. The colony was empty. No people, no bodies, no buildings, really just some dismantled structures and a defensive palisade. No signs of violence, no signs of panic, no messages scrawled in desperation. Well, there was one message. Carved into the palisade was the word Croton, and nearby, etched into a tree, simply Crow. White had told the settlers that if they had to relocate, they should carve their destination somewhere visible. If they were in danger, they were to carve a cross above the name. There was no cross. So maybe they'd gone to Croatoan Island, known today as Hatteras Island, home to a friendly native group that had helped previous settlers. Logical enough. But when White sailed there to investigate, a storm turned him back. He never returned to the New World, and Roanoke, as a functioning colony, was never seen again. Which brings us to the mystery. What happened to those 115 people? Did they really just pack up and leave? Did they assimilate peacefully with the Croatoan people? Were they killed in a conflict that left no archaeological trace? Did they head inland, get lost in the forest, and vanish into the folds of time? Theories have multiplied like rabbits in the centuries since. One popular idea is that the colonists integrated with local tribes that they intermarried, adopted new customs, and essentially stopped being English colonists and started being something else entirely. There have been tantalizing but inconclusive reports over the years of indigenous communities with gray eyes or surnames like Dare and White, but nothing definitive. Other theories veer darker: disease, starvation, or attacks from less friendly tribes. Some think the colonists tried to sail back to England and were lost at sea. There are even stories of secret massacres and cover-ups, because if there's an unsolved mystery in early American history, there's probably a conspiracy theory hanging out nearby. More recently, archaeologists have found clues, broken pottery shards, signs of European-style housing in unexpected places. There's evidence to suggest that at least some of the colonists moved inland, perhaps splitting into smaller groups, but definitive answers remain frustratingly out of reach. Roanoke's enduring power isn't in what we know, but in what we don't. There's something inherently unsettling about a group of people, families, children, a newborn baby vanishing so thoroughly that all that's left is a word scratched into wood. No goodbyes, no bones. Just crotone, like a cryptic post, it note left for a rescue team that arrived too late. And maybe that's why the story still haunts the American imagination. It's not just a colonial footnote. It's an origin myth with a hole in the middle. The kind of mystery that invites you to fill it in with your own fears or hopes. They were lost. They were saved. They became something new. Or they were swallowed up by a continent that didn't ask for them and didn't leave a trail. The lost colony of Roanoke wasn't the end of English colonization, of course. Jamestown followed, then Plymouth, then the whole complicated mess that eventually became a nation. But Roanoke was the first try, and its silence echoes louder than any success story. In the end, Roanoke may have been a warning, a whisper from the edge of a new world saying, "You're not in charge here." And that, maybe more than any carved word, is what was really left behind. In the heart of Central Asia, across the deserts and steppe and between jagged mountains, the bones of cities lie scattered in the dust. Not just villages, but full civilizations, marketplaces, mosques, libraries, gardens. Merv, Nishapur, Samarkand, Balkh, Khiva, and a dozen others once hummed with the music of merchants and the scratch of scribes. These weren't outposts or border towns. These were jewels, luminous cities along the Silk Road, gleaming hubs where cultures collided and trade transformed empires. And now? Now they're mostly wind, rubble, and names in the footnotes of forgotten history. Take Merv, for instance. Located in present-day Turkmenistan, Merv was once among the largest cities in the world. Not poetic exaggeration, actual, head-counted greatness. Around the 12th century, it may have held over 500,000 people. It had aqueducts, domes that glittered in the sun, and a library that drew scholars like moths. The Seljuk Empire made it their capital. Poets wrote verses under the moonlight by candle in courtyards. It was a place so rich and bustling that when Genghis Khan's son Tolui showed up in 1221, he reportedly asked for a census. Then he ordered the entire city to be slaughtered. That's not hyperbole. Historical sources claim that after the Mongols took the city, they murdered every man, woman, and child, somewhere between 300,000 and 1 million people, depending on which terrified scribe you believe. The irrigation system was destroyed. The libraries burned. The city was reduced to dust, brick by brick, soul by soul. Merv never really recovered. Today, you can visit the site. It's mostly desert and low mounds, the outlines of greatness smeared across the ground like a ghost's shadow. Then there's Nishapur, in modern Iran, which was almost as prosperous a key node in the Silk Road network, famous for turquoise, poetry, and the brilliance of its artisans. It was the birthplace of Omar Khayyam, mathematician and poet of the Rubaiyat fame. The city had great domes, palaces, madrasas, and ceramic production that rivaled anything in China. And then the Mongols came here too. After the death of Genghis Khan's general in Nishapur, the Mongols, in a particularly poetic act of rage, leveled the entire city and massacred its population. Even the cats and dogs, if the legends are to be believed. It was later rebuilt, sort of, but never with the same shine. Earthquakes helped finish the job, shaking apart what war hadn't already crushed. Why did these cities die? It wasn't just Mongols, although they certainly hit hard. Earthquakes regularly battered the region. River systems shifted. Irrigation canals silted up. Empires rose and fell. The Silk Road, once a superhighway of ideas and silk and spices, was eventually replaced by sea trade. Why risk crossing bandit-haunted deserts when you could sail? And some of it, frankly, is just the entropy of civilization. Even great cities crumble when the world moves on. Central Asia's ghost cities weren't wiped away all at once, like Pompeii. They faded. Populations dwindled. Sand filled the courtyards. The books were eaten by time. And eventually, the music stopped. There's something particularly eerie about how complete the disappearance was. Many of these cities were so important in their day that entire kingdoms revolved around them, and now they barely earn a sentence in most history textbooks. Sometimes the silence is physical, the wind brushing against crumbling walls, the sound of your own footsteps echoing through ruins. Sometimes it's in the maps, seeing the dot labeled ancient city in the middle of a nowhere landscape, with no highway, no airport, no sign of modernity. And yet, they mattered. Merv and Nishapur were fonts of scholarship and creativity, when London was a swamp and Paris was a muddy village. They preserved the knowledge of the ancient world, transmitted mathematics and medicine across continents, built observatories, trained astronomers, and translated the stars into meaning. Their influence rippled outward, shaping everything from Renaissance philosophy to algebra, and then they vanished, not into fire and apocalypse, but into history's blind spot. Today, archaeologists still dig. Tourists, the brave, the curious, the heat-tolerant wander the ruins with cameras and sunburns. Somewhere beneath the layers of sand and stone are old coins, shattered tiles, skeletons with stories still stuck to their bones. We try to piece them together, but it's like listening to an orchestra through a broken radio. The cities didn't just collapse. They were swallowed, first by invaders, then by time, and now by our own forgetting. But under the right light, with the right breeze, you can almost see the shadows moving again. A camel caravan entering the gate, a boy splashing water in a fountain, a merchant counting coins at sunset. It's all still there, just buried beneath the dust of 100 silent silk roads. The cities of the Indus Valley don't get the same blockbuster attention as ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, but they absolutely should. Around 2500 BCE, while the Nile and Tigris were still testing early pyramids and ziggurats, the Indus Valley was quietly crushing it. Massive cities like Mohenjo-Daro, Lothal, and Dholavira stretched across what is now Pakistan and western India, intricately planned, impressively clean, and bafflingly ahead of their time. And then, somewhere around 1900 BCE, they were gone. Not destroyed in fire, not conquered, not even slowly decaying, just emptied out, stopped, like someone hit pause and never came back. Let's start with Mohenjo-Daro, which translates to Mound of the Dead, because of course it does. At its peak, it may have supported around 40 people, all living in a city with grid-planned streets, standardized brickwork, and what's widely considered the earliest known system of indoor plumbing. We're talking working sewers, water storage tanks, and even a giant public bath at the center of the city. Their building codes were better than some modern towns, and yet, no palaces, no obvious temples, no grand statues proclaiming who was in charge. It's as if the people here decided that the city itself was the power. And then it was over. Lothal, further south, was a thriving port. That's right, these folks had maritime trade before we were supposed to have maritime trade. Lothal had a dockyard connected to rivers and the Arabian Sea. It exported beads, pottery, and maybe even cotton to Mesopotamia and Egypt. Their craftsmanship was exquisite. Their urban layout was precise. They even had a stormwater drainage system. But eventually, Lothal dried up literally. The port silted over, the water receded, and the city faded into the salt-tinged dust. Then there's Dholavira, perched on what was once an island in the Great Rann of Kutch. This city had layered zones, an upper city, middle city, and lower city, each with its own style of reservoirs and water conservation. Rainwater harvesting? Check. Multi-level defense walls? Check. An early understanding of how to survive in an arid, inhospitable place? Triple check. Dholavira was less about conquest and more about sustainability. And yet, like its siblings, it too eventually unraveled. So what happened? Well, no one knows for sure. But the leading theory is a slow-motion environmental disaster. Evidence suggests the mighty rivers that fed these cities, especially the once massive Sarasvati and Ghaggar Hakra, began to shift or dry up entirely. Climate change may have played a role, triggering long-term droughts that made agriculture unsustainable. If the monsoons failed and the rivers changed course, the entire backbone of Indus Valley life would have cracked. You can't trade if you can't irrigate. You can't irrigate if there's no water. Add to that tectonic activity, some geologists believe earthquakes may have helped redirect rivers or damage critical infrastructure. In a region built around precise hydrology, a few good shakes could have changed everything. What makes the disappearance of these cities so strange is how peaceful it appears. There's no archaeological evidence of mass slaughter, no burnt layers, no walls breached by invaders. Instead, the cities seem to have been abandoned gradually, their populations dispersing like morning fog. Some may have migrated east toward the Ganges plain, blending into new cultures, leaving their bricks and plumbing behind. And yet, for all their sophistication, the Indus Valley left almost no written record we can understand. Their script, dozens of tiny inscriptions carved onto seals and pottery, remains undeciphered. Unlike the Rosetta Stone that cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs, we have no bilingual artifact to unlock the Indus code. So we don't know what they called themselves. We don't know who ruled, or how, or what they believed. We're left with silence, beautiful, brick-shaped silence. And maybe that's what makes these lost cities feel so ghostly. We can map their streets and marvel at their engineering, but we can't hear their voices. It's like walking through the skeleton of a civilization that chose to vanish with dignity, no flames, no glory, no carved warnings to future generations, just a slow fading into the background noise of time. Today, the sites are archaeological treasures. Mohenjo-Daro, though endangered by waterlogging and neglect, still draws visitors willing to brave the heat. Lothal's dockyard lies quietly in the dry basin where water once flowed. Dholavira has been granted UNESCO World Heritage status, a fitting nod to a city that was way ahead of its time and too smart to stick around for the collapse. The Indus Valley people didn't leave us epic poems or tombs of gold. They left us bricks, drains, and questions. And somehow, that's even more haunting. Because it means they weren't trying to impress the future. They were just trying to live well. Then one day, they stopped. And the world forgot until the archaeologists came digging and realized they'd stumbled onto one of history's most elegant vanishing acts. Port Royal was never meant to be a respectable place. That was kind of the point. Perched on a thin spit of land along Jamaica's southern coast, it was the 17th century equivalent of a Vegas Bahamas mashup, but louder, drunker, and significantly more armed. This was where pirates came to party, where rum was cheaper than water, and where your average tavern probably had a punch bowl, a brothel in the back, and at least 3 outlaws negotiating stolen Spanish silver over a dice game. It wasn't just lawless, it was lavishly lawless. England, needing a buffer against the Spanish in the Caribbean, had quietly encouraged privateers to use Port Royal as a home base. The city thrived on looted gold, human trafficking, smuggling, and every other economic activity that made polite society clutch its pearls. And for a while, it worked. Port Royal became one of the wealthiest cities in the New World, with 4 times as many drinking establishments as churches, and reportedly 1 drinking house for every 10 residents. Not that most of them were upright citizens. This was a place where pirates like Henry Morgan went from rum-stained plunderers to knights of the British Empire, proof that even in the 1600s, if you stole big enough, someone would call you a hero. But then came June 7th, 1692. It was late morning. The sun was hot. The harbor was crowded. People were going about their usual business, selling fish, sharpening swords, drinking themselves into oblivion. And then the ground began to shake. What followed wasn't just an earthquake. It was a total urban exorcism. The 7.5 magnitude quake struck directly beneath the city. Buildings collapsed instantly. The soft, sandy peninsula that Port Royal was built on, essentially a giant sandbox, held together with rum and pirate hubris, began to liquefy. That's not metaphor. The ground literally turned to soup. Entire streets sank into the sea. Taverns, warehouses, private homes, whole blocks just slid sideways into the water like cocktail trays off a sinking ship. Witnesses described horrifying scenes. People vanishing as the earth opened beneath them. Coffins from the city's overcrowded graveyard surfacing and floating past survivors. And a wall of seawater sweeping through what remained. In under 3 minutes, 2/3 of Port Royal was gone. Around 2:00 people died immediately, with hundreds more succumbing to injuries, disease, or sheer bad luck in the days that followed. Of the survivors, many saw it not as a disaster, but as divine punishment. Preachers conveniently alive and suddenly very loud declared the earthquake a judgment from God on the city's sin. The idea stuck. The wickedest city on earth had been judged and found wanting. Port Royal slid into legend, just as it had slipped into the sea. But divine wrath wasn't the only explanation. The real culprit was poor engineering and worse planning. Port Royal had been built hastily on sand and silt, with few foundations and no idea what might happen during a major quake. The liquefaction, where solid ground suddenly turns liquid under stress, was textbook geological karma. The only thing surprising is that it didn't happen sooner. Today, the ruins of Port Royal still lie beneath the shallow, murky waters off the Jamaican coast. Archaeologists have recovered tankards, coins, clay pipes, and even an entire pocket watch frozen at the exact time the city began to die, 11:43 a.m. The watch's glass face was intact. Its owner was not. There's something fitting about how Port Royal ended. Fast, loud, chaotic. The city didn't fade away with time or decay into ruin. It got swallowed whole, as if the earth itself got tired of its nonsense. It was an apocalypse tailor-made for its inhabitants. Dramatic, soaked in salt water, and ending in a drinking story nobody lived to tell. Jamaica never really rebuilt Port Royal as it was. The British tried to re-establish it as a naval base, but it was never again a place of wealth and pleasure. Hurricanes hit it. Fires scorched it. Another earthquake hit in the 20th century just to make sure it stayed humble. These days, it's a sleepy town with some dive bars, a naval dockyard, and a history that's mostly underwater. And yet, Port Royal endures not in bricks and mortar, but in every romanticized image of pirates swilling grog, shouting over sea shanties, and living large on stolen time. It's the blueprint for every drunken sailor fantasy and every fictional pirate's lawless utopia. Except it was real. And for about 30 glorious, raucous years, it was the center of the Caribbean's pirate heartbeat right up until the moment the sea took it back.